Ambassador Kethra stood at the observation window of her ship and watched Earth grow larger against the black of space. She had spent 6 cycles studying this world and its people. She had read their history files, watched their broadcasts, and learned their dominant language. Now she was about to meet them in person for the first time. The Velothi had conquered 12 star systems through military strength. They were a proud species, tall and scaled, with eyes that could see heat signatures in complete darkness. Their warships were feared across the galactic arm. But the Galactic Council had forbidden conquest of Earth. The humans were too new, too primitive, too interesting to destroy. Instead, the Council wanted trade and observation. Kethra had protested the assignment. Babysitting a young species seemed beneath her rank. But orders were orders, and so here she was. Her cultural attach, a young male named Ven, joined her at the window. He was nervous. She could smell it on him, that sharp chemical scent of Velothi anxiety. The reports say they are emotional creatures, Ven said, prone to sentiment. They form attachments to animals, to objects, even to ideas. They argue about morality constantly. Every decision takes forever because they must discuss how everyone feels about it. Kethra made a sound of agreement. This should make negotiations simple. Emotional species are easy to manipulate. We offer them something that makes them feel good, and they give us what we want. The Council wants access to their rare earth minerals, Ven reminded her. Then we shall have it. How hard can it be to deal with a species that still argues about whether to feed its own poor? The shuttle ride down to the surface was smooth. Humans had not yet developed artificial gravity, but their chemical rockets were surprisingly refined. Kethra watched through her window as they descended through clouds and emerged over a vast gray city that stretched to every horizon. The humans called it New York. It was one of their major population centers, home to millions of individuals packed into towers of glass and steel. The spaceport was new, built specifically for alien visitors. Kethra noted that it was clean and efficient, designed to process large numbers of arrivals with minimal delay. She approved. Perhaps these humans were not entirely primitive. A delegation waited for them on the landing pad. There were 7 humans in identical dark clothing. Their leader was a female with short silver hair and a smile that showed teeth. Catherine knew from her studies that tooth-bearing was not a threat among humans. It was meant to indicate pleasure or welcome. Ambassador Kethra, the human female said. I'm Secretary Wilson. Welcome to Earth. We're honored to host the first Velothi trade delegation. The words were warm, but Kethra noticed something odd. The human's eyes did not match her smile. They were calculating, measuring, evaluating. This was not the emotional openness the reports had described. Thank you, Secretary, Kethra replied. We look forward to a productive partnership. The first 3 days were filled with tours and ceremonies. The humans showed off their cities, their technology, their art. They served elaborate meals and made speeches about peace and cooperation. Kethra found it all very standard. Every species did this when receiving important visitors. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Kethra was seated in a conference room in a tall building owned by something called a corporation. The humans had explained that corporations were collective entities that engaged in trade and production. This particular corporation was called Nexus Industries and had manufactured communications equipment that the Velothi found interesting. The meeting was meant to discuss potential trade terms. Kethra expected it to be long and difficult. The humans would want to debate every detail, argue about fairness, worry about consequences. Instead, the human executive across the table smiled that same teeth-bearing smile and pressed a button on his communication device. This is Marcus Webb, CEO of Nexus Industries, he said into the device. Effective immediately, we are implementing Phase 3 of our restructuring initiative. All personnel in Departments 7 through 12 are terminated. Security will escort them from the building. Severance packages will be processed according to standard protocol. Thank you for your service. He pressed another button and set the device down. Kethra stared at him. What did you just do? Cleared some dead weight, Webb said. Those departments were redundant. The work can be distributed among remaining staff with minimal loss of productivity. It will save us $80 million annually, which we can redirect to our alien technology division. He smiled again. That's the division that will be handling our trade with you, Ambassador. How many individuals did you just dismiss? 3,247. Kethra felt Ven shift beside her. She could smell his shock, sharp and acrid. And this is permitted? She asked. Permitted? Webb looked genuinely confused. It's expected. Shareholders want efficiency. If we can do the same work with fewer people, we'd be failing our fiduciary duty not to make the cut. He leaned forward. I know alien species sometimes find our business practices unusual, but this is how we stay competitive. This is how we grow. Through the window behind Webb, Kethra could see movement on the street far below. Tiny figures were emerging from the building, carrying boxes. 3,000 people, she thought. Just like that. No argument. No negotiation. No apparent feeling at all. The dismissed workers, she said carefully. They will protest? Demand compensation? Fight back? Webb laughed. It was a warm sound, friendly even. Ambassador, they'll update their resumes and apply for jobs at our competitors. It's just business. Everyone understands that. Kethra looked at Ven. His scales had gone pale. I think, she said slowly, that we may have misunderstood your species. 6 months passed. Kethra remained on Earth, officially to oversee the developing trade agreement, unofficially because she could not look away. Every day brought new revelations about humanity, and each one was more disturbing than the last. She had expected chaos from them. She had expected emotion and sentiment and endless arguments about right and wrong. What she found instead was a species that had turned efficiency into a religion. They did not conquer with weapons. They conquered with spreadsheets. Her education continued over what the humans called a working lunch. Kethra still found the concept barbaric. The Velothi believed that eating was sacred, a time for family and reflection. Humans apparently believed it was wasted time that could be optimized for productivity. David Chen was her guide for these lessons. He was a mid-level trade negotiator, pleasant and helpful, with that same calculated smile she had learned to recognize. He was explaining shipping routes while eating something called a sandwich, talking between bites as if this were perfectly normal. The most direct route from Earth to Velothi Prime goes through the Kepler Reach, Chun said, pulling up a holographic map. But there's a protected zone in Sector 7, breeding ground for the Kepler rays. Big, non-sapient creatures migrate there every 12 years to spawn. The protection treaty adds about 4 days to any transit. A reasonable delay, Kethra said, to protect the species. Sure, if you only make the trip once. Chun tapped the map, highlighting numbers. But if you're running a regular shipping route, those 4 days multiply. Over a year, that's almost a month of lost transit time. The fuel savings alone from the direct route would be 4.7% per trip. Kethra felt her scales tighten. You are suggesting we ignore the protected zone. I'm not suggesting anything, Ambassador. I'm just presenting the math. Chun took another bite of his sandwich. For what it's worth, most companies follow the protection treaty. The fines are significant. Good. Although, Chun paused, chewing thoughtfully. The fines are a fixed amount. If you do the calculation, They're only cost prohibitive if you use the route fewer than 600 times per year. After that, the savings outweigh the penalties. Some of the bigger shipping companies factor that into their models. Kethra set down her eating utensil. Suddenly she was not hungry. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that your species has calculated the exact point at which destroying a breeding ground becomes profitable." Chun looked uncomfortable for the first time. "I wouldn't put it that way, Ambassador. How would you put it?" "It's just business analysis. Understanding the full cost structure. Most companies don't actually violate the treaty. It's more like knowing your options." Kethra thought about the Velothi relationship with nature. Her people believed that every living thing was connected, that harming the environment was harming oneself. They had protections for sacred places, for breeding grounds, for the delicate balance of ecosystems. But those protections existed because the places were sacred, because life was precious, because some things were beyond calculation. The humans had calculated everything. "Your species prices the natural world," she said. "You assign numbers to things that should be beyond numbers. Everything has a price, Ambassador." Chum said it like he was stating a simple fact. Once you know the price, you can make informed decisions. That's what makes us efficient. We don't waste resources on sentiment when the math tells us a better way. What about when the math is wrong? Chun frowned. The math isn't wrong. Math can't be wrong. It just is. I mean, what about when the numbers do not capture everything? What about value that cannot be measured? What about the worth of a species that cannot pay for its own survival? For a long moment, Chun was silent. He put down his sandwich and looked at Kethra with something that might have been confusion or might have been pity. "Ambassador," he said gently, "I think you might be overcomplicating this. The universe is full of species. Some thrive, some don't. The ones that thrive are the ones that adapt, that find ways to be useful, that offer something the market wants. That's not cruel. That's just reality. And if a species has nothing the market wants," Chun shrugged, "then they need to develop something, or find a niche, or—" He trailed off, but Kethra understood the unspoken ending. "Or disappear." That night, Kethra sent her second report to the Velothi Council. She wrote about the Kepler rays and the shipping calculations. She wrote about the humans' ability to reduce everything to numbers. She wrote about how they had taken concepts like protection and preservation and turned them into line items on a balance sheet. Subject to cost-benefit analysis. She wrote, "They are not evil. That is what troubles me most. They believe they are being rational. They believe efficiency is virtue. They have built a system where destroying something precious is simply a business decision, where the only question is whether the numbers work out." And she wrote, "They have learned to separate action from responsibility. The executive who decides to use the forbidden route does not see the dying rays. The worker who calculates the savings does not feel the loss. Everyone is just doing their job, just following the logic, just being practical." She ended with a question. "How do you fight an enemy that does not see itself as your enemy? How do you defend against a species that conquers not through hatred, but through arithmetic?" The council's response came 3 days later. It said, "Continue observation. This is valuable intelligence." Kethra looked out her window at the human city below. All those lights burning through the night. All that energy spent on productivity and growth and the endless pursuit of more. She wondered how long it would take before the humans' calculations turned toward the stars. She wondered if the Velothi had anything the market wanted. The flood came in the 9th month of Kethra's assignment. She watched it unfold from the safety of the trade delegation's building, high above the water that swallowed entire neighborhoods. The humans had known it was coming. Their scientists had predicted this for decades. The ocean was rising, the storms were growing stronger, and certain coastal cities were doomed. This was not sudden or surprising. It was scheduled destruction, penciled into planning documents and insurance tables, accounted for in long-term projections. What horrified Cathra was not the water. It was the response. She stood with her aid van at the window, watching emergency vehicles navigate flooded streets. Below them, a shelter had opened in a public building. People were streaming in, carrying children and bags and whatever they had managed to save. The humans' emergency system was efficient. Cathra had to admit that. Within hours of the flood's peak, there was food, water, medical care, and organized processing stations for the displaced. But then she started to notice the patterns. A human liaison named Sarah Park was assigned to explain things. Sarah was patient and helpful, always willing to answer questions. She had a gentle voice and kind eyes, and Cathra had grown to trust her over the months. So when Cathra asked about the different colored wristbands she saw on flood victims, Sarah explained without hesitation. Green means they have insurance and a confirmed place to relocate. They're processed first, usually out of the shelters within 48 hours. Yellow means some complications, maybe disputes with their coverage, maybe waiting on family. Red means no insurance, no resources, no clear plan. And what happens to the red wristbands? Sarah's smile flickered, just for a moment. They receive standard services. Food, water, basic medical. They're helped to explore their options. Cathra watched a family with red wristbands being guided to a far corner of the shelter, away from the main processing area. There were a lot of red wristbands in that corner. Mostly elderly. Mostly people with dark skin and worn clothing. Mostly the ones who could not afford the premium warning services that had evacuated wealthy neighborhoods 2 days before the flood hit. What options do they have? Cathra asked. Well, there are relocation assistance programs, housing vouchers for other cities, job training initiatives. Some of them might qualify for temporary placement in. Sarah stopped herself. Look, Ambassador, the system isn't perfect, but we're doing the best we can with limited resources. We can't save everyone. We have to be practical. There was that word again, practical. Cathra had heard it 100 times since arriving on Earth. It was the humans' favorite excuse. Their all-purpose justification for every cruelty their systems produced. The neighborhood that flooded, Cathra said. I read that proposals to build better barriers were rejected 10 years ago. Sarah nodded slowly. The cost-benefit analysis didn't support it. The neighborhood was, well, the property values didn't justify the investment. The money went to protecting the commercial district instead. More economic value per square meter. So you knew these people would lose their homes. The projection showed it was likely. Yes, and you did nothing. Sarah's eyes finally met Cathra's. There was something there, beneath the professional calm. Something that might have been shame, or might have been helplessness. Or might have been the hollow acceptance of someone who had stopped fighting a long time ago. Ambassador. I personally did nothing because I personally have no power. The decisions were made by committees and algorithms and elected officials responding to voter priorities. No one decided to let these people suffer. The system just produced this outcome. It's how things work. That night, Cathra visited the hospital where flood victims were being treated. She was curious about human medicine, about how they cared for their sick and injured. What she found was another system of calculations. A doctor explained it to her. Every treatment had a cost. Every cost was weighed against the patient's ability to pay and the likely outcome of the treatment. There were approval processes and denial processes and appeal processes. The doctor spoke of these things with exhaustion, not anger. He had clearly fought the system once and lost. That woman there, Cathra said, pointing to an elderly human on a bed in the corner. She was in the flood. Her leg is infected. The doctor checked his tablet. She's uninsured. We've stabilized her and applied for emergency coverage, but the treatment she needs isn't approved under the basic plan. We're trying to get an exception, but he shrugged. These things take time. She could lose the leg. Yes. Because of paperwork? The doctor looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. Because of how we've decided to allocate healthcare resources in this country, Ambassador. It's not personal. It's just the system. Cathra returned to her quarters and found she could not sleep. She kept thinking about that word, system. The humans used it constantly. The system did this. The system requires that. No one ever seemed to be responsible because everyone was just following the system. But systems were built by people. Systems were designed, implemented, maintained by human hands and human minds. At every step, someone had made a choice. Someone had decided that property values mattered more than lives. That insurance premiums should determine who got warning and who did not. That a leg was not worth saving if the paperwork was incomplete. And yet, no one felt guilty. No one lay awake at night. Because they had all learned to see themselves as small pieces of a large machine. Powerless to change anything. Just doing their jobs. Just being practical. She began her third report to the council. They have found a way to commit harm without feeling it. She wrote, each individual is innocent. Each choice seems reasonable. But the total effect is monstrous. And no one is responsible because everyone is responsible. And that means the same as no one. Cathra's final report took 3 days to write. She worked on it alone in her quarters, refusing meals, speaking to no one. Ven worried that she was ill, but she was not ill. She was trying to find words for something that defied easy description. She had come to Earth expecting one thing and found another entirely. The Velothi were conquerors, yes. They took what they wanted through strength and will. But they looked their enemies in the eye. They felt the weight of their choices. When they destroyed, they knew what they were destroying. The humans had found a better way. She began her report with history. The Velothi had expanded through the galaxy the old way, with warships and soldiers and the clear logic of superior force. They had faced resistance and crushed it. They had faced surrender and accepted it. Everywhere they went, they were recognized as what they were: invaders, masters, conquerors. But Earth would not work that way. The Galactic Council had forbidden military conquest. Trade was the only permitted path. And trade, Cathra had learned, was where the humans truly excelled. She wrote about Marcus Webb and his 3,000 dismissed workers. She wrote about how not one of them had protested, how they had simply accepted their fate and moved on, grateful not to have been dismissed sooner. She wrote about how the humans had trained their own people to see themselves as resources to be managed, costs to be minimized, inefficiencies to be eliminated. She wrote about David Chun and his shipping calculations. She wrote about the Kepler rays and their breeding ground, reduced to a line item on a cost-benefit analysis. She wrote about how the humans could calculate the exact point at which destruction became profitable, and how this was considered not shameful but sophisticated. She wrote about the flood and the red wristbands. She wrote about Sarah Park's helpless acceptance and the doctor's exhausted eyes. She wrote about a system that produced suffering without malice, that destroyed lives through nothing more than the accumulated weight of reasonable decisions. And then she tried to explain why this terrified her. The Velothi understand cruelty, she wrote. We have practiced it. We have felt its cost. When we harm others, we carry that harm with us. It shapes us, limits us, eventually teaches us restraint. But the humans have escaped this burden. They have built systems that do the harming for them, that separate the decision from the consequence, that allow each individual to remain innocent while the collective produces horrors. The executive who signs the layoff order does not see the families without food. The committee that rejects the flood barriers does not watch the elderly drown. The insurance company that denies the claim does not hold the hand of the patient as she loses her leg. And because no one feels responsible, nothing changes. The suffering continues, increases, spreads, and everyone simply shrugs and says it is the system, says there is nothing to be done, says we must be practical. Kethra paused in her writing. Through her window, she could see the human city going about its business. People hurried to their jobs. Vehicles filled the streets. Commerce flowed like blood through the body of civilization. Everything worked. Everything was efficient. She continued, "We should not go to war with this species. War would make them sympathetic. War would unite them. War would give them an enemy to fight, and humans fight well against clear enemies. Instead, we should simply trade with them. We should let them teach us their ways. And that is exactly what I fear. I fear that we will learn their efficiency. I fear that we will adopt their systems, their calculations, their practical approach to suffering. I fear that one day a Velothi executive will dismiss thousands of workers with a pleasant smile, and no one will protest because everyone will understand that it is just business. I fear that we will learn to price everything, even the things that should be beyond price. That we will look at our sacred places, our breeding grounds, our vulnerable populations, and we will see only numbers to be optimized. Most of all, I fear that we will learn their greatest trick, how to be cruel without feeling cruel, how to destroy without guilt, how to see ourselves as small pieces of a large machine that does harm without harming, that kills without killing, that conquers without conquering." She finished her report late at night. The city lights twinkled below her like a field of cold stars. Somewhere out there, people were working late, maximizing productivity, doing their jobs. Somewhere, someone was being laid off. Somewhere, someone was being denied care. Somewhere, someone was losing their home to a flood that had been predicted and allowed. And tomorrow, everything would continue as normal. She sent the report to the council with a final recommendation. "Maintain the trade partnership," she wrote. "It would be impractical to do otherwise. The humans have resources we want, and we have resources they want. Business is business. But remember what we are dealing with. Remember that the humans do not conquer with weapons. They conquer by making you think like them, by teaching you to see the world as they do, by showing you how efficient cruelty can be when you call it something else. They will not defeat us in battle. They will simply make us partners. And one day, we will wake up and realize that we have become them, that we measure everything in their terms, that we have learned to separate action from consequence just as they have. On that day, our conquest will be complete, and we will not even recognize it as conquest. We will call it progress. We will call it optimization. We will call it being practical." She added one final line. "The humans are terrifying, not because they are evil. Evil can be fought. The humans are terrifying because they have found a way to make evil convenient." 3 years later, the first Velothi Corporation was founded. It was, everyone agreed, extremely efficient.